It's a very warm welcome to this first edition of the Rebound Series. My name is Farai Mwakutuya. It's a pleasure that you are joining us on this program. Now, today we want to kick off our discussion by looking back at 1980, where we were soon after independence. And one of the things that Zimbabwe was hailed for was its education sector. It was the envy of many across the continent. We had education for all, expansive rollout of teacher training, building of schools, amongst many others. Literacy rates were high, pass rates were high. 41 years later, is the situation still the same? And if not, what needs to be done to address it? That will be the focus of our discussion today.
I would say we have a fairly better education system as compared to other African countries. One that is effective, in the sense that you look at the literacy rate in Zimbabwe, it is somewhat bigger than majority of African countries. And you'd find that we are even introducing this education system to children at a very tender age. Like, for instance, these days there's ECD. Before, it used to be you go to creche, and then some others were not even affording the opportunity to go to a preschool. You just go to grade 1 and then proceed. But now there's ECD, and it's somewhat compulsory for kids to start off from there. So our children are actually being tamed from a very young age, and because of that, our education system is actually quite clear, because it is easy for our children to understand, which explains why we have a high literacy rate. If it was a system that was, marred with difficulties and stuff like that, would have less people understanding what is happening in the education sector.
My panel includes the programs manager for the Education Coalition of Zimbabwe, Mr. Clemens Inhlizio. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you.
The outspoken Secretary General of the Progressive Teachers Union of Zimbabwe, Mr. Rebound Series. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And obviously, saving the lady for last, the chairperson of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Primary and Secondary Education, Honorable Priscilla Misiaira-Wimshonga.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Clemency, we'll start with you. Let's get straight into this discussion. Paint us a picture of where we are now. I said in 1980 we were top of the pile. Where are we now? Give us a picture.
Right. In terms of our education, we are now at a situation that is bad. That is bad not only for now, but also bad for the future generation, because there is a lot of inequalities in terms of our education. You'll find that we speak of privatization of education. Education is now being privatized. We have got shortages of classrooms. We have got shortages of schools. We have all the challenges to do that have been brought by COVID-19. Inequality is, for us, is really increasing in terms of access to education, even though we still talk of literacy rate and so forth, but there is a lot of inequalities in terms of access to education for the learner. And we've got challenges to do with teachers, I'm sure he's going to talk about. We've got challenges to do with teachers. Are teachers really teaching in schools? Are they really teaching? Is there still that passion for teaching, with the issues to do with teacher welfare issues being a challenge in this country? So the situation is so bad. It's so bad, and bad for the next generation.
Honorable, let me bring you into this discussion. He's just talked about inequalities, access to education, privatization. Some people argue that privatization brings efficiency, but I mean, that's a discussion that we will have as well in this program. But just in terms of your portfolio committee and the work that you've been doing recently, what have you found on the ground, and are you happy about it?
No, certainly. I don't think anybody can be happy with the current situation. And I think Clement speaks, to what the foundational problem is. We have had an ideological shift in the country. When you look back at the 1980s, generally we had a movement towards public sector development. Resources for government were directed towards ensuring that social services are not paid for. Over years, with the coming in of the SAPs and the new kind of economic programming that we've had, we certainly have moved from where we were left to the right. So he is right in saying when capital comes in and when you start privatizing things that are supposed to be for public good, this is what happens. So it's a structural ideological issue where our resources are not necessarily being directed to ensuring that they go to those that need, those that are vulnerable. So you see the kind of inequalities that Clemens is talking about. So it's just not about where are the resources. It's literally having to discuss ideologically where we are as a nation and as Africa in general, because it's not just about Zimbabwe where we're beginning to see this shift. It's a global shift that is happening, and that's where we need to direct our conversations at.
Can we change that shift or change the ideological direction?
Well, it's about acknowledging. The shift comes by acknowledging the fact that we actually have moved, that we are now pro-capital. We have to admit that issue. And when we do that, then we can have the debate to saying, is that movement good enough? So if Africa has received the memo that says we are going capital and they've embraced it, then that's where the problem is. But if Africa decides that there is a conversation that we need to have where we deliberately are going back to ideological conversations and saying, what is it that a government needs to do as a government? Where does government put in resources and where does government stop capital from taking over? What we have seen is whether it's health, whether it's education, we've seen capital taking over. And for us as legislators, and unfortunately a number of legislators are also part of capital. So this conversation does not really take place in the manner that it's supposed to take place.
Raymond Majongwe, is it sustainable to go back to this ideal that the Honorable has just spoken about, where government is funding and resource and has the resources to do this? Does the government, specifically in our situation here in Zimbabwe, have the resources to be able to play that role it did previously?
I think, like the Honorable Member of Parliament has stated, the question is, are we ready to go back? And like she correctly points out, capital has taken over. We have a new neoliberal shift, and out of it, we are obviously going to see privatization and persecution of the poor. Said that particular reality is obtaining. But I want to believe for as long as the people are here, for as long as the grassroots are going to be demanding, that why did we go to the liberation war? What was it about? Whose interest was it for? Are the citizens the owners of this country? If we are the owners of the country, we can stand up and demand that we see a proper ideological shift back to where we started. Apparently, the reason why things are like this is because some people have come and said, we have compromised too much, we must go back to basics, let's make sure that people pay for the services that they're going to get, but ultimately, have we invested in that particular direction? I think the most important point is, as citizens, we must stand up and say, this far and no further. We cannot allow capital to continue dictating and determining the pace and direction, because as far as we are concerned, a lot will, in the long future, we are definitely going to see serious challenges, because the same people that we are denying access to education and many of these service delivery that they expected, they will turn this country upside down, because we have allowed the particular anarchy to go on. We are sort of blessing people who are coming because they have the money, their political direction is the one that we are celebrating, and out of it, we are taking this country down. Because at the end of the day, more citizens will be poorer, because we're actually creating a bigger class of rich people and a bigger class as well of poor people. And out of it, that inherent conflict will be difficult to manage. So the politicians must be warned, deal with the issues that address the needs of the people. Because if you don't do so, the Ides of March will be coming.
Let me put it to you. I mean, you've just spoken about capital, and obviously capital looks for profit and making as much money as we can. Teachers seem to be at war with their employer about money, demanding more money. Isn't that fueling the challenges that are being faced? Because now we are needing to pump more resources into remunerating these teachers, which could have a bearing on the accessibility of education.
Apparently, one must go back to basics. What are the teachers saying? Teachers are just not crying for money like kids are crying for toys. These teachers we are talking about are adults, they are citizens, they are parents. They are saying, pay us what we are worth. We are in a country where the same teachers, as of 18 October 2018, they earned $520. In the same country, same leadership, same ideological direction. Now they are earning $44. And you expect them to be quiet. You can only be an idiot to remain quiet where you are being denied access to what you believe is legitimately yours. We live in a country that is unparalleled opulence and extravagance. Leadership in this country behave as if there is no tomorrow. So you can't expect teachers to then be quiet, to be silent when they can't send their own kids to school, when they can't clothe properly, when they can't pay for rentals. We are only doing what is legitimately correct. We are demanding what we are worth. According to our own constitution, one who is going to work must be paid a reasonable wage. That's all we are asking for. We are not asking for too much. We are not asking for diamond mines. We are not asking for diamond fields. We are just saying to the government, pay us what we are worth. The wealth that is in this country, that is being siphoned out of this country through many other shadow deals, are actually denying citizens legitimate salaries that they ordinarily should be getting. So we are simply saying to government, for as long as these issues are not going to be addressed, that crying, that noise will not stop. We will continue bothering them until they listen to what we are saying.
Honorable, let me just bring you in here, because we ultimately must turn to you as the elected officials, the people we vote in to represent us, to fight for us. You have heard one constituency, the teachers, the constituency you've just talked about, capital coming in and making education inaccessible, the challenges we are facing in terms of quality and delivery and access. What role is Parliament playing to ensure, what are you doing to ensure that these issues are addressed?
Well, we do the things that are required of us. As you know, we are obligated by the Constitution to represent the interest of our people. We are obligated by that same Constitution to be responsible for doing oversight over government. We are obligated by that same Constitution to ensure that we come up with laws that are fair and that are just. So you will know that one of the things that we have done, at least as the Portfolio Committee, is to come up with the Amendment Act, Education Amendment Act, that deals with these issues around how do we ensure that every child has a right, as founded in our Constitution, to go to school for a basic education, at least from Form 1 to Form 4. But of course, we've had to deal, this is why I keep going back to the ideological issues, that this is just not a Zimbabwean issue. It's, in my opinion, a global African issue, where we need to sit down and say to ourselves, when we agree to some of these economic programs, what exactly are we talking about? When we say to ourselves we are going to cut down on expenditure, on public expenditure, when we say government has no role in facilitating or dealing with some of these issues that are in the economy, what are we agreeing to? What are we admitting to? Because it becomes a structural issue. Because when somebody says to you, I can't put, when you look at the IMF issue right now, particularly for Zimbabwe, the things they've asked to do, one of the things that they've actually asked Zimbabwe to do is that you should not increase salaries. So this debate is just not, when I listen to Majongwe say, this is what we are saying to our government. Your government has actually agreed at some international level to say we are not going to increase salaries.
Increase salaries beyond their means, I think is what...
Yeah, but they've been given a particular percentage. So for whatever money you get, as GDP that you get, you can't go beyond it. That's what your staff monitoring program is all about. So when we imbibe some of these economic issues, you need to understand that they will have an impact on the ground. And this is why I'm saying Yes, it's Zimbabwe, but it's also a global issue. It's also about Africa and the things that we are agreeing and we are putting on the table. We know that we started going down when we took on ASAP. And we have never gotten back. My father was a teacher. I know the kind of things that he could afford, like Majongwe is saying. He was paid his worth. He could afford to have a house. He could afford to get a loan. So even if he wanted to get out of the teaching service, he knew that if I get out of the teaching service, I'll have a problem with my house. Now the Majongwes, ndova komana wekuseri. And you know, this is why you go in Korokoza. The reason why we can't get some of the teachers out there is that during lockdown they found other ways of making money, and he's beginning to ask himself, should I go and spend this time in the classroom, or should I go in Korokoza, or should I just go at my house and bring people that will come into my house and they will pay? So it's a structural problem.
Clemens, I want you to come in here and, very briefly, I mean, you've heard what has been said here. Is there a way out?
Yes, definitely there is. There is. If we put our heads together and come up with a solution, then we can find a way out. Everything now hinges upon the financing of education. And the solution does not lie in looking for donor funding. We should not look for donor funding because education financing elsewhere in the world is dwindling. So we need to come up with local-based solutions, country-based solutions. And we can ride on devolution now, and make sure that all these challenges that we are facing, challenges to do with infrastructure. We have got a shortage of over 5,000 schools for primary and secondary. And we need to come up with a framework that will enhance us to come up with domestic financing for education. We can't have our diamonds being taken in Manicaland whilst we have shortage of schools in Manicaland. We can't have our grenade being taken from Mtoko when we have a shortage of schools in Mtoko. We need to really structure in terms of our policies to make sure that we harness finance domestically.
Indeed. I'll stop you there only because we are out of time. We need to take a short break and come back and continue this discussion where we are focusing on the education sector, assessing what the challenges are, but crucially, how we can come up with solutions. What's the way forward? Stay with us. Every Zimbabwean wants their country to return to its former glory, and we believe that we have a role to play in doing that. So we'll be speaking to different Zimbabweans from different facets of life to share their views of what it will take to get Zimbabwe to rebound. The Rebound Series comes to you every Friday between 5 and 6 p.m. on the Heart and Soul digital platforms. Join me, Farai Mwakutuya, for those incisive discussions. Welcome back. This is the Rebound Series, and I do thank you for staying with us. Today we are discussing education, the education sector, and unpacking some of the challenges that are facing it and trying to come up with a way forward. Clemens, before we went to the break, you were talking about the need to mobilize domestic resources to fund education because donor funding is not sustainable going forward, in your view. You spoke about diamonds, you spoke about resources. Treasury, I'm sure, will tell you that the funds that come from those resources have competing demands. We need to fund health, we need to fund social security, amongst many others. So there is a small cake, and they are perhaps trying to do the best they can with what they have. Where will that money come from?
But if we are serious about human capital development, we have to invest more in education. Because even our laws, if you look at the Constitution, Section 75, it makes it clear that it is the mandate of the state to provide education. Honorable spoke about the Education Amendment Act. It speaks about basic state-funded education, which means education will be funded by the state. So the state has to come up with solutions to make sure that education is funded and to make sure that there is free education from ECD up to Form 4. So we need to come up with solutions. Treasuries come up with the 2% taxes and so forth. Those we can structure something for education. We can structure something like if a company is coming to invest in Zimbabwe, then a certain percentage of their profits should go towards education. If we are serious about building the human capital development in this country.
What is the role of parents in all this? Because we've spoken about state-funded education, but these schools have parents who pay fees. So what is the role in terms of that and trying to mitigate perhaps some of the shortcomings? Raymond.
I think by parents we need to qualify. Parents in terms of adult citizens, parents in terms of people who have left school. The moment we're able to qualify and put them within the proper context, then we'll get the correct answer. Because if you go to any school, there are former old boys and old girls of those particular schools, or the parents who are taking kids to a particular school. Because ultimately the most important thing is the economic inequalities that we are now seeing. Mm-hmm. Many of these people that we are calling parents are actually victims and are struggling to survive in this economy. So if you expect them to come in and chip in and assist government, they will be found wanting, or they will deliberately not want, because it then creates inherent challenges within the structure of these people that we are calling parents. But the whole thrust, in my view, we must go back to government and say, what has government done? Show us the blueprint of what you have been doing. What are your challenges? Then we go back from there and then we develop. Because if we are going to pass the back end, government abdicates responsibility, like what Clemens has been saying. Because we expect government to come in and take the lead, because they are the ones who are collecting the taxes. They are the ones who are obviously overseeing the distribution of the wealth in this country. Before we even go to the parents, what has the government done? Because in my view, a lot is being lost, and that loss that we are seeing through corruption, short deals, and lack of proper management is where the greatest weakness is, before we even pass the buck to parents. Because the moment we start involving parents in infrastructural development, we're obviously going to come up with substandard structures, because many of us who are coming from these schools that are still under pole and dagger and thatched roofs, that is the contribution of the parents, and that's the best that they can do. So let's go back to basics. Let's create a structure. What is government supposed to do? What is the role of parents in this particular scenario? We're supposed to be benefiting from the human capital that is going to come out of the process. Yes, parents will come and say, because my kid has to go through education and I must invest in it. But the moment we then pass the buck to say parents must take over, we are creating a serious problem. Government must take responsibility, and we must challenge them and monitor what they are doing on the ground.
Indeed, you talk about what has government done. Now, I just want to move the discussion a bit. We've obviously spoken about the resource challenges, and as we wrap up the discussion later, I think we'll come back to it and come up with action items in terms of what do we do, what's the way forward. But you talked about what has government done. What we've seen them do in recent times is, implement curriculum review, which is meant to make our education more relevant. To address the needs of the country going forward, the human resource and capital base.
Should that be the responsibility of government? Because I think we're actually creating serious problems along the way. Because the moment the government starts structuring a curriculum, and yet then they politicize the same curriculum, give it different names as and when it suits them, we create serious challenges along the way. We have serious problems with this particular new curriculum that government brought on board, because it's not addressing the challenges. If we are an agricultural-based economy, show me where agriculture is featuring in this particular economy. It's not in this particular curriculum. It's not there. The most important point is we are talking of ICT. Where is ICT fitting in all this? We still have schools that have no water, no electricity, no solar power, nothing. If you want modernity to become your direction, invest in it. Government has not invested in ICT. There's nothing. We have schools now that have no chair, that have no desk, and yet you're talking about ICT. What are we talking about?
Honorable, speaking to some of the points that is just raised there, specifically because of COVID-19 and how we expect it to revolutionize our way of living, including education, the new normal that is coming up, the need for connectivity, the need for online learning. I have met students who say, their parents don't even have mobile phones. So they can't, even if they wanted to, they can't participate in online learning. A girl I met who was doing O-level, I'm not sure if she eventually wrote. She said sometimes she asks her friends to use their phones, but and she says, as a committee, what are you doing to address this challenge? Because this COVID situation has the risk of actually leaving very many students behind.
Well, just before I get to that, I just thought that the issue of parents was important. I think let's deal with it very, very openly and candidly. The burden of education has actually been carried by parents. That's basically what has happened. Because if you look at the budget that I get as a portfolio committee, 96% is going to remuneration, things like that, and only 4% is actually what goes into the education sector. So if you ask and say, what is the role of parents? Parents have been carrying the education. The burden of education has actually been resting on parents. So I thought I needed to say that. And I want to agree with Raymond. And again, I want to go back to the conversation I've been having about Africa not being very clear about where they are at any given time. We need to be very contextual about where we are. When you are talking in Europe and all the other countries in the north, you can talk about online and things like that because the infrastructure is there. You have circumstances where, like he's saying, there is no wall, there is nothing. These kids have nowhere to sit. So we should be saying to ourselves, given where we are at the moment, what is it that we should be prioritizing and putting onto the table? And that's where the inequalities and where capital comes in. So those that have resources will find that they are pushing discussions and conversations around ICT because they're at the level where the child can go with a laptop. I can't have that conversation with a child that is in Binga, who I am thinking around at the very basic level. How do I ensure that this child, when there is rain, are able to sit somewhere where they can study? So what COVID has done, it has shown us, it has, kind of put on the table the problems that we've always had. So you can't hide them.
The ones we've been sweeping under the carpet.
Ones that we have a legacy problem around education. So we need to go back to basics, just like we had to go back to basics around issues of health when we're now hit by COVID, and started saying, so how do we create an isolation center? How do people get tested? Where do people get admitted when they're ill? That's why we had to get up and start having Wilkins. So we need to have that same conversation in the context of education and understand that we had gone rock bottom. We are rebuilding, and when we are rebuilding, we can't speak like Sweden. We can't speak like the UK because we are at a different level. Indeed. And our issues are different. Which is why, for me, when you have this conversation, the difficult thing that I find with Africa is that there is no continental, regional conversation. We visited Zambia; it's bad. You visit Malawi; it is bad. So you want to say, from a regional point of view, from a continental point of view, why are we where we are right now? And how do we begin to build ourselves so that we can get to the level where others are? So ICT, fine, I hear it. But for me, for the actual person, when we go to, where did we go? Siavonga.
We went to Siakobo.
When I'm in Siakobo, I'm like, really, seriously?
So Clemens, what is she says, the conversation that we should be having now should not be the one that's being had in Sweden.
Yeah.
What should we be doing right now if we were to say, how do we address this issue of access to education under the COVID pandemic for students who don't have access to these facilities? What do we do?
We need to talk of infrastructure development. Infrastructure, not looking at only classrooms, but we are talking of internet connectivity. We are talking of alternative education that the ministry introduced in terms of radios, in terms of television lessons and so forth. But we need to look at the internet infrastructure itself. What is the reach in Zimbabwe? We still have some areas in Zimbabwe where there is no radio connectivity, but we are talking of radio lessons. We still have some areas that are accessing television waves from Botswana, from South Africa, and not Zimbabwe. And we are talking of television lessons. We can't talk of internet. We can't talk of internet because there are issues to do with connectivity itself. the cost itself, the data itself, men do not afford the data. And you talk of internet lessons, it's ridiculous. So we need to think deep and invest. Like he said, if you need something, then you need to invest in it. We need to invest deep into infrastructure.
Raymond, radio, TV lessons, the delivery, the effectiveness, perhaps not as great as face-to-face. So I'll put the same question to you. Under this COVID scenario, how best do you think we should structure learning to get the best out of it?
I will basically start by saying, when we put all these variables in place, we must never forget there are people who are citizens in this country, who, even if you're going to put online services, radio and TV, kids with disabilities, teachers with disabilities, they must also never be forgotten in all this particular template. Because the moment we don't put them on board, we relegate them into second-class citizens, we throw them into under the bus, and perpetually they then become victims of a system that has basically been militarized. So I will come back to basics and say, when all these things are said and done, like he correctly observes, if somebody can't afford a bundle of vegetables, which is about 40 cents to cook, and you want them to buy bundles for a phone that they don't own, that they've never owned, that they can't even dream of owning, that particular inequality is what has basically then gone forward. Put it further and say, why is it that now when you go back to these schools, these are the schools where we are recording 0%, and somebody hallucinating from wherever they are coming, they are going to headmasters to say, tell us, why did this school get a 0%? He's a member of parliament who is driving the latest SUV, coming into the school, burning 4 liters per kilometer, but he comes to a headmaster whose kids are coming to school on an empty tummy, don't even know what a computer looks like. They sit on a brick as a desk. They have not had lunch. They don't even know what a sanitizer is. They have never worn a mask. And you expect them, the headmaster, to then be responsible and take responsibility for the falling standards in our schools setup. I think we need to go back to basics. Make sure that even the people who are running the ministry have the taxonomy of education. Because if we are going to have a country where everybody can become a minister of education, how do you expect service delivery to then be normal in this particular sector when many of the people who have been appointed as ministers of education lack the basics? They have not been through the mill in terms of coming up to be educationists themselves.
But are there no technocrats in those ministries?
You must understand.
Who advise the minister?
That's the point. You advise the minister, who is a plenipotentiary, who carries his message to his own superior. And once those particular vagaries come about, you are definitely going to find a situation where there's so much disquiet, where technocrats who are politically appointed go to a plenipotentiary who carries his own message to his superior, and out of it is a concoction of poor admin and lack of execution of particular outcomes.
Let me stop you there. We need to take another break. We'll be back to continue this discussion. Stay with us. The Rebound Series today discussing education. Every Zimbabwean wants their country to return to its former glory, and we believe that we have a role to play in doing that. So we'll be speaking to different Zimbabweans from different facets of life to share their views of what it will take to get Zimbabwe to rebound. The Rebound Series comes to you every Friday between 5 and 6 p.m. on the Heart and Soul digital platforms. Join me, Farai Mwakutuya, for those incisive discussions. We do thank you for staying with us. It is the Rebound Series today discussing education. My guests are the Secretary General of the Progressive Teachers Union of Zimbabwe, Mr. Raymond Majongwe, the Programs Manager for the Education Coalition of Zimbabwe, Clemens Nhlizio, and the Chairperson of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Primary and Secondary Education, Honorable Priscilla Misiya-Mshonga. Let me come to you, ma'am. Back to basics, I think, is the key thing that is coming out of this, the fact that we need to address some of the ideological issues so we get to grips with the inequalities. Talking about inequality, something that I think has always been historically an inequality in Zimbabwe, and I'm sure Africa as well, is access of education for the girl child. Where are we in terms of Zimbabwe?
Well, what we've seen is that when we are at primary level, at entry level, we do find these girls, which is why you will have a situation where you can have, or people can talk about, oh, we had more girls passing, at primary level, grade 7 level. But when the attrition level, as we begin to move to secondary level and to university, you begin to see that many of them, fall off, and for a number of reasons. The usual things, when you're looking for resources for the child to go further, you always choose the boy to go. Then, of course, the sexual issues. And I think with COVID, what we have noticed this time around is the high levels of pregnancies that we're now having to deal with, and what kind of support structure you then have to ensure that these girls' future and the babies that they're carrying, that does not stop with them. So and I think this is why I keep saying COVID to a large extent has brought out the problems that have always existed, but in a way where we can see it, so we can't argue about it. So if anybody was arguing about the fact that girls are more vulnerable to issues of sexual abuse, we have now seen what that actually means, because to a certain extent, schools have been a safe haven. It has been an escape for many of the girls. It's not necessarily because they are pregnant because they've been having too much sex during lockdown. They are pregnant because they were now in spaces in which where the safety valve, where they used to go and be safe, was closed off. And that's what we are beginning to see. So there's a nexus between girls being out of school in their safe out of their safety zone, and the vulnerability to sexual abuse, which is what we're now witnessing.
As you say, what we are seeing now is being laid bare, the challenges that we've always had. Now, if we continue to have these scenarios of girls dropping out, of pregnancies, of low enrollment and numbers of girls going through the education system, does it mean that all the efforts that are being done have been ineffective? What is going wrong? Why is it that we continue to see this?
Yeah, we go back to the structure. That's why I keep going back to the structural issues. Raymond was talking about what you see as the opulency. For me, and this is where I agree with Clemens when he says the resources are in here, I just don't understand why those that have resources are not being taxed more. It doesn't matter where you're taxing them, whether it's this big car that he's talking about, why we are licensing that car in the same manner as somebody driver chimshika. So we need to, you cannot punish, but those that have the resources and are living well need to pay more so that they can cover for the poor. But in this instance, whether you are poor or you are rich, it doesn't matter what service you are getting in this country. You pay exactly the same. So in fact, the poor actually pay for these luxuries of the rich. And it's back to the ideological thing. Why would somebody structure an economy in a manner that you do not necessarily let the rich pay?
I think that might open another can of worms where people say you are penalizing us for doing well, for excelling and performing well. But that's a debate for another day. Everyone here seems to agree or concur that we need to go back and address some ideological issue, that it's back to basics, that this is a legacy challenge. And from what you are saying, there seems to be no will to address some of these issues. Should we be despondent and not have any hope for the future? Are we on our own as parents, as learners, as people who want an education system to thrive and flourish in this country?
I'm sorry, I really have to butt in. The opulency is never explained. This is why the issues around corruption cannot be separated from the issues of resources that we have. And in Parliament, we have had a long debate around unexplained wealth. We just have to deal with people that have such wealth and opulence. You just move around some of these places in this country and see the kinds of houses that we have, the kind of cars that people have got. I have no problem with people that are rich. But one, explain how you got it. Two, when you have gotten it, pay for the luxuries of having it. You can't pay the same amount with somebody who is in Bari. And that for me is where the problem is. Why are we subsidizing the life of the rich at the same level as we are doing the subsidy for those that do not have? So I'm not penalizing. I don't want you to leave this thing about me wanting to penalize. People that are rich should stay rich. But really for me, it's about how did you get to that wealth? Because it's also about, the issues that we are talking about, the wealth that is being siphoned out of this country, and the impunity in which that is done.
True. Are we on our own? Going back to my other question, because is there hope that these things can be fixed? Clemens, I'll start with you.
Definitely, there's hope. For me, the hope comes from the type of legislation that we do have, because the type of legislation that we do have recognizes these challenges and try to come up with solutions on how we should solve these challenges. But our challenge has been mainly on in terms of implementation. We come up with very good policies. I can tell you the Education Amendment Act is a very progressive policy document. If implemented well, then we are out of these challenges. But the challenge has always been on terms of implementation. We don't implement what we would have thought these are the solutions. We've come up with good solutions, good documents, but they're just kept there, not implemented.
Which has happened for many, many years and may continue. So what do we do in the face of that? Where there's a high likelihood that this fantastic Amendment Act will not be implemented, then what?
Yeah, I think it's now not a matter of just waiting to say government has to do this, government has to do this. We need to move from the rhetoric and really actually force government to implement. We need to talk about it. We need to knock at their doors to say you said you wanna go, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do this. Can we have timelines to say this thing must be done by this time, and always make a follow-up, work with the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee to make sure that they do the oversight, to make sure that they monitor whether the government is implementing what it should be, or it should be monitoring. We should not sleep and just let them do whatever they want.
You do that a lot. We see a lot of question time in Parliament and things like that. Sometimes ministers turn up, sometimes they don't. But do you think that this is the way to go, to keep hammering it, to keep taking them to account?
Well,
that door will eventually be opened if we keep knocking.
Well, as somebody that has been in that house for 21 years and I'm going away, I'm leaving, I certainly am now convinced that part of the frustration that we have as a nation is that we always deal with the now and not with the tomorrow. We need to begin to build a citizenry that questions, a citizenry that is clear about what their role is and what the role of a political leadership is. And this is why for some of us, we are wanting to invest now in civic education within the schools, in getting our people to begin to understand what the role of a citizenry is. Because yes, we can complain about political leadership, but we get political leadership that we want and that we deserve. So part of the conversation that we should be talking about is how do we get the current kids that we have to begin to demand and to require. Yes, it means that we have to bring them in a particular institution, but we need to continuously feed into our citizenry. Because for me, it's also, parents that sit and don't question. You have teachers that are not going to school and you still take your child to school. Is that not a problem?
Indeed. Raymond, I want to bring you in as we head towards wrapping up some very interesting points raised there. The one about teachers not teaching, which I want to take you up on. But also, as the Honorable says, we want to have a citizenry that questions, that holds to account. Unfortunately, in the past in this country, anyone who's sort of done that is labeled. Yes. Has that changed? Do you see that changing? So those are my two questions to you. First of all,
that hasn't changed. Nothing has changed. We have continued on that Mugabe trajectory, where everybody who raises a critical point is either an agent of the West, is being used by opposition, and I want to believe Raymond Majongo and the Progressive Teachers Union of Zimbabwe have paid dearly for it, simply for saying, let's improve the welfare of teachers, their conditions of service. Let's engage on issues around collective bargaining, discuss around the welfare of teachers, their salaries, challenges faced by women, teachers. Why is it that of late there is so much separation in terms of marriages, divorce rates for teachers, married men and women? Such basics, you get the flag for it. And it's purely because we have people who are choreographed to think that every sort of criticism that comes about is meant to challenge political authority.
Is there no element, though, of perhaps you being too militant? That perhaps the approach that you are using is perhaps what creates that reaction.
Apparently, we must not have a nation of leaders that are choreographed to think that militants must be punished. The same leadership that we have is the same leadership that when they were 18 years old, they were bombing trains, and we celebrate them today for it. They are leaders today because they did partake in those acts, showing bravery. We are not bombing anything. Under the Mugabe era, I once said, Robert Mugabe, I think it was 1952 or 53, where he stood up and said, I will challenge Garfield Todd for a boxing match because he had reduced his salary by a cent. He said, if you reduce our salary by a cent, I will box you. This is a young Robert Mugabe who was saying this. He was not arrested for it. But for Raymond Majongo to simply say, take our salaries to where they were in October 2018, I won't even sleep at home. So we must go back to basics. Let this country, the citizenry that she's talking about, that responsibility of saying Zimbabwe comes first. I'm happy with her because she's the first chairperson of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee. I'm not saying this because she's here, but I've always said it consistently. This is the first chairperson of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Education who has engaged unions, not just PTUZ, every other union she engages. And out of it, a lot of positive vibe comes up. And I want to believe if all these Parliamentary Portfolio Committees were going to have that particular acumen, we would be somewhere. First and foremost, because of the oversight role that the particular committee plays, we have had challenges for exams under ZimSec, turbulent, chaotic leadership that has taken us through serious challenges at the examination level. And I want to believe their interventions have helped us a lot. Where I think now, if we are honest as a country, the responsibilities, the roles that Parliamentary Portfolio Committee that she has played are quite critical and must be taken note of. And they must be rewarded because downstream, the benefits are there to be seen. We have seen policy change. We have seen policy shift, policy direction. Ultimately, things that are practical and real being witnessed on the ground. So as far as I'm concerned, out of this particular engagement and many of such, the citizenry will ultimately realize that it's our responsibility. We can't allow government to abdicate that role that they should be playing. We must be able to stand up and say what is best for our children, what is best for our teachers, so that the parent that she's talking about will know that teachers are not at school. I will not take my child to that particular school. That's where the girl child is going to be abused. That's where the child with disability is going to be abused. So at the end of the day, the moment we come to a point where all of us agree to say what is best for our education system, salaries will improve, conditions will improve, infrastructure will improve, and we will talk about how best can we invest money so that the extravagance and the opulence, people that are celebrated in this country, who own luxuries, but they've not built a single creche. If you go back to many of these Bill Gates and company, you'll find out they've created foundations that invest in education. We have names that are celebrated here. What do? They throw white parties. They do massive things, huge gigs to be celebrated. Not even one creche has been built. I will even mention a few names. People who have done great things, show their wealth everywhere, flaunt it all over. But they've not even bought a single textbook for a school in Mzarabani. It's a shame.
I must stop you there, but I must also say and pay tribute to you, Honorable, because of what we are hearing here. I'm glad that, we're ending this discussion on what seems to be a positive note, at least hope restored, because as Mr. Majongwe says, there have been policy changes, there has been positive engagement, and that gives us hope for the future, which is ultimately what we are trying to achieve with this effort, to focus on what are the challenges and say, look, this is how we fix it. From what I'm gathering here, you are doing a lot of positive, and we hope that you continue to do that.
First time from him.
But it's great that you are doing that, and I think you raise a very, very pertinent question when you say, I think everyone here is saying there's a bigger ideological, global continental question that needs to be addressed. Privatization of education, is it sustainable? Will it create the future that we want, or will it leave other students behind? This is The Rebound. My name is Farai Mwakutuya. I want to thank my guests for coming through for this discussion that we've had. Stay tuned. There'll be much more coming your way.
I think I would say we are somewhere 6 out of 10 as a nation. Then compared to other countries, I think we are still a little bit behind, because our education system is not empowering people so that after going through the education system, they can become self-empowered, they can start something that can sort of generate income, create employment for themselves. It's sort of our education system isn't that much empowering, I should say.
Dzidzo yepa Zimbabwe inini kuri kurutivi kwangu zvangu. Zimbabwe is the best. Because kubva vana vachitanga ECD, ECDA, ECDB. Unoona kuti kubva mwana achine makore madiki diki anenge akutokwanisa kutaurawo nechirungu, akukwanisa kuita zvimwe zvinhu zvisingaitwe nevana vekune mamwe macountries. Achizinge akura pazera rekuti grade 1 to 7 anenge vachidzidziswawo futi zvimwe zvinhu, maskills nechichi. So which means education yemuZimbabwe iri kuita kuti vana vave open minded, vana vavhurike, vasakura vakapusa, vanokura vakangwarira. From form 1 to form 6 vanenge vachizobatwawo futi vachidzidziswa zvekare up to university level. But ukada kutarisa kune mamwe macountries havasi kukwanisa kusvika kune level rakadaro. Ukazotarisa manje uchikompare eZimbabwe mumwe munhu wekune imwe nyika, you find out kuti weZimbabwe anenge angori always pamberi, anenge akati ngwarirei, anokwanisa kutaura nechirungu, anokwanisa kuita zvimwe zvinhu zvisingaitwe nedzimwe nyika, because zvinhu zvakatangira vachiri vadiki. Saka education yemuZimbabwe so far is the best. It's improving kubva tikada kutarisa kuma 90s zvichikwira, kuti vana vamwe vaizoenda kuchikoro vane ma7 years, vamwe vaizoenda even ane 8 years. But now mwana ari kutanga kudzidziswa kachiri kadiki. Find out kuti 4-5 years kamwana kanenge akutotaura fluent English, kamwana kanenge akutokwanisa kuita zvimwe zvinhu zvisingatogoneki kuitwa nevanhu vakuru vekune dzimwe nyika. Saka education yemuZimbabwe so far is the best.
Not that something is not right about education system, but rather if we can enhance in other aspects of the education system. For example, if we increase efforts and resources towards the information technology aspect of our education sector, we would actually become one of the best African countries, with a better education system. Because you look at Nigeria, I believe we are somewhat lagging behind a little bit as far as the information technology is concerned. So perhaps if we can put more resources in that area, our education system will be better.